Alright guys, MTech Guy here, and in today's video we're going to take a look at giving your E60 M5 an engine tune-up. Alright, so why are we going to be talking about a practice that mainly relates to old school carbureted engines when we're stood in front of a car, a relatively modern car, with a fuel injected computer controlled engine? Okay, so first of all we need to understand what this S85 engine is and what makes it what it is. So of course we've got this high revving, high horsepower V10 engine, and all that power's right up in the top end of the rev range. It's all top end power with one of these engines. There's no real low end torque, there's no real low end power. It's certainly not a torque monster, it's not a muscle car, but you have got that bloody great V10 engine, 5 litre, and when you're screaming right up at that top end of the rev range, that's where all the power is. Now probably the best way to describe this is, if you take a look at the old Chevy small block engines, you know, single cam. Now if you went and put a real high lift cam in one of them, you move that power band right to the top end of the rev range, a bit like one of these, it's all going to be top end power and you're going to lose a lot of the low end power. And what happens is you end up losing a lot of that smooth idle down the bottom end. It ends up lumpy, low P, sometimes it won't even idle properly at all because that optimal power, the optimal operation of the engine is right up at the top end of the rev range, so you've lost it down the bottom end, and often they just won't run right down the bottom end. Now, why are we talking about old school Chevy small block engines on a BMW channel? Well, that principle sort of is along the same lines as one of these engines, where it's primarily designed to give you that power right up at the top end of the rev range, but then what BMW have done is also enabled it to run nice and smooth down the bottom end and give you some real smooth, nice drivability down the bottom end. And how they've done that is with the use of the Valves system, which just reins everything in as much as it can, so then down that bottom end it gives you that nice smooth idle, that smooth running, and also the throttle actuators play a big part in that. When you've got the car setting 400 horsepower, just reins things back a bit, and that just makes it drivable down the bottom end. So it's almost the opposite to a regular BMW engine, you know, them nice smooth straight six engines where it's giving you the power, you know, close to the bottom end, and they run super smooth. This is sort of the opposite, where the power's all up at the top end of the engine and then everything's having to be reined in just to make it run nicely down the bottom end. So with that in mind, I often get a lot of questions from many owners about the cars not running right down the bottom end. You know, they're getting a rough idle, fluctuating idle, a high idle, and it's just not right. Now this is something different to like a regular misfire, where you might have a failing coil, a failing plug, or a failing fuel injector, which are often relatively straightforward to diagnose. This is something a bit different to that. Now this is a lot of small items that might accumulate into a bigger problem, and they're all going to have an effect on the idle. So what I often suggest is giving the car a bit of a tune-up. Now these engines are very sensitive down the bottom end. If something's just slightly off, you'll soon see it in the way it's idling. It'll just stand out like a sore thumb, and it doesn't take much to throw it off either. So it's really important to get a lot of the small items all sorted, get them running just so, and then that should lead to the car running optimally, giving you a nice smooth idle without further problems. Alright, so let's take a look under the bonnet and see what items we're talking about here. Alright, so let's take a look at this, eh? So first up, you want to be looking at the two air filters. Now what can happen over time, obviously they can get clogged with dirt, debris and whatnot, but also with these engines, what can happen is some oil residue can get up inside the intake plenums and it'll find its way through to the top side of the air filters. So sometimes you'll see a bit of a black oily residue on top of the air filters there, so you want to make sure you've got a decent fresh set of air filters in every now and again. And then moving on from that, you want to be looking at the mass airflow sensors. Got one there, same on the other side. Now that oil residue can end up getting built up on the sensors themselves, so it's worth whipping them out and giving them a good clean with some MAF airflow sensor cleaner. And moving on from that oil residue issue, it's worth checking out your Pcv valves and making sure you haven't still got the original ones in the car, because if you have, it's likely that they're blocked or starting to fail, starting to get worn out. So it's worth getting them changed out, get them done to avoid any engine ventilation or unnecessary oil consumption issues, and also you're going to prevent a lot of that oil residue getting up into the intake plenum and through onto your air filters and your MAF airflow sensors also. Now another thing these engines respond to really well is changing out your spark plugs, getting a fresh set of spark plugs in there. Normally it sorts out a lot of idle issues, so if they've been in there a long time, or if you've got a dirty set of spark plugs in there, if they're not running right, it's worth changing them out, and that often straightens out a lot of issues. And also, when you're in there changing out your spark plugs, it's worth checking out your ignition coils also and making sure they're in good shape. Now, like I say before, if you do have a proper misfire situation, and if it is due to a failing coil, you'll often get very obvious codes. But when you're changing out your spark plugs, just check out them ignition coils. Often the clasps at the top can become broken, or they can become covered in oil. You know, there's a number of issues, so just make sure they look okay. And if there's any doubt, just chuck a new one in if you've got a dodgy looking one, and that's going to help to make sure the engine's running nicely also. Now, the other thing you want to be thinking about is your fuel system. So it's worth putting some fuel injection cleaner in with a full tank of fuel to help maintain your fuel system's health, and it'll ensure the injectors maintain a uniform spray pattern. So that's going to help with your smooth idling, your smooth running, and it's also going to help prevent any injector issues further down the line. These engines have been known to have injectors get stuck open due to debris, and what can happen is you can end up hydrolocking the engine. So it's just another job that's going to help in the long run, in the grand scheme of things. And the final thing you want to be looking at, and it's not in the engine bay here, it's in the boot, is your battery. Now, you want to be checking your battery's health, because even when they're slightly below normal operation, which you'd normally get away with in a lot of cars, can cause all sorts of issues with these cars. We're talking misfires, fuel delivery issues, SMG issues, and on and on. And it can send you down a rabbit hole trying to diagnose an issue that'll be unrelated with the component you're experiencing issues with. Now, if your battery's 5 years old or older, get it out of there. It ain't worth potential issues with one of these cars. You can check the indicator on the top of the battery that it's still green, and it's worth sticking a voltmeter on there, and you should see approximately 12.6 volts with the engine off, and between 13.8 volts and 14.2 volts with the engine running. Alright, so there we have it, guys. If you're experiencing idle issues or things aren't running just right, not smooth enough, it's worth checking out these small items first, get them all sorted, and then that'll give you a nice baseline moving forward if there are bigger issues that are causing the issue or contributing to the issue. But you need to get all these small items sorted out first, and that'll be giving your engine a decent tune-up, and it should sort out a lot of them smaller issues. Alright, don't forget to like and subscribe, guys. I'm MTech Guy. Thanks a lot for watching.